We're live. Hi, Aditi. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hi, Grace. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I've been a fan of all the great episodes you've done and some of the awesome speakers you've had, including some of my friends. So I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. I want to start with, while I was like doing the research, like I thought one of the things that you have that I really love is like you have a personal board of advisors. Actually, that's a question I ask on every single Smart Venture podcast episode. Maybe we can start there, like
Yeah.
who's on your personal board of advisors, and then we can dive into your career journey in venture. Um, how
Yeah,
does that look?
absolutely. Well, it's funny. It started many years ago so I think it's like tied into this concept of I've always believed that everybody needs a coach for everything they do. I was an athlete growing up. I played competitive squash in growing up in India, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and then I came to the US. I played squash all through college as well. And I think one thing I always appreciated is I always had a coach for
Mhm.
um, the sport, but I think it was once you get into the work world, you kind of are left to just figure it out for yourself.
Mhm.
And you don't always have a coach and you don't always have somebody who is supporting you or giving you feedback along the way. And
Mhm.
really, it's like an encouragement in getting you to improve and be a better version of yourself.
Mhm.
And so I kind of informally started to call people I'd say it was initially mentorship relationships, but they went a little bit deeper because I think with mentors, you kind of learn through osmosis or, you happen to be around. Some mentorship is a little bit more involved, others less so. Um, but I basically, through osmosis or through sort of an organic path of spending a lot of time with a couple of folks, kind of started to put together my personal um, advisory board or like my
Mhm.
personal board of directors. And I would say my dad has always been on it. My dad's been someone who's been both an inspiration for me from a career perspective as well as from just a work ethic, family life, and just like a discipline perspective. He was a competitive athlete growing up. He worked in banking, he worked in finance for a long time. He now runs his own private equity fund. And just he's always been an inspiration. I think he handles himself with grace. He really is someone a lot of people look up to, and I think I am one of those. um, I'm going to be cheesy and say my mom is also on my personal board of
Mhm.
directors, mostly because she's kind of, I always say she's it's like a quote from My Big Fat Greek Wedding. She's like the neck that turns the head.
Mhm.
She really is like the central nervous system of our family. And I think that being a working parent, especially a working mom, is incredibly hard. And that's something that she's always done. And I'm a twin. And so she's had two
Oh,
kids at the
wow.
same time. Yeah, I have a twin brother in Singapore. And yeah, and so I think like she's someone who continues to inspire me. And then I'd say there have been people who I've worked with in the industry for in a variety of different roles. There are people that I've
Mhm.
always felt very like I've built a long term relationship with. There a former partner at Upfront who actually was someone I had known for a while before. A lady named Kara Nortman is someone who I've always said had been on my personal board of directors for a
Mhm.
long time. Someone who continues to inspire me, but is also someone who I think has challenged me at different times. And I think everyone plays a unique role. Another close family friend is a lady named Jody Miller, who I think very highly of and is someone that
Mhm.
I continue to be inspired by, former founder. So yeah, those are some of the folks. I would say there have been many other great people in my life and mentors
Mhm.
and folks that I wouldn't say officially have any title.
Mhm.
I'd say the only people who officially have titles are my parents, and maybe I've said Kara in the past too. And I think now it's a little bit more of a board that has kind of expanded, and it's been something that's very special. I'd say the biggest things I've looked for is people who continue to challenge me and people who continue to push me,
Mhm.
as well as knowing that there's psychological safety in that relationship. I think the work world can be pretty hard, but I also think frankly a lot of this is about psychology management. I was a psych undergrad, and I've been thinking about this a lot, which is as our industries go through turbulence, and I'd say we're in a turbulent time right now. There's obviously a lot of excitement around the categories that people are investing in, but there's also harder times with companies that maybe aren't AI companies or businesses
Mhm.
that are trying to find their way. And I think that so much of our jobs is about managing our own psychology, but also about managing our founders' psychology. And so that's something that just I continue to think about, like, who are people doing that for me, is like sort of helping me to manage that, helping me to question it, and also just like keeping me in balance there. So yeah, that's a little bit about my personal board of directors.
Amazing. I wonder, so like since you're from Singapore, I saw that you went through like the IB program. I did the IB program for my high school as
Oh
well.
yeah.
I wonder when it comes to like building a network in the US, um, maybe if you could touch up on like, I guess like how do you build the VC network when you first started at maybe Crosslink and later on you joined like Google on the corp dev department and um then now you're a partner at Upfront and you have invested in like multiple great companies like a Chime or like today I saw the writer AI announcement. And why don't we talk about like, what is it like to build up like an effective VC network at the very beginning? And how do you kind of like translate the call it like the board of advisor, like slash mentor slash sponsor into like, helping you like um developing the next step for yourself in the venture ecosystem? Because I feel like on one hand, like you can see a lot of people that are like great mentors, like they gave you like 500 ideas, but the problem is like not many people could like call it like sponsor you, bring you into their fund, and like um, I feel like that's on the next level. Like, how do you kind of like develop that kind of relationship
Yeah.
as well?
Yeah, totally. So I'd start off by maybe I can share a little bit on my process of the
Mhm,
way that I built out my relationship. So it started actually before I joined venture. So when I was in college, I think I drank the Kool-Aid very hard,
mhm.
got really excited about venture. I'd taken a couple of classes where we had founders come in and talk to us about company building, talk to us about, times they've had to pivot,
Mhm,
hard decisions they'd had to make, and board members or investors that had kind of helped them through this process. And I would
mhm,
say one thing that we have noticed is, or one thing that I always noticed was venture was this job that you get paid to learn. You were
mhm,
literally sitting in rooms with some
mhm,
of the smartest people who knew 10 times more than what you did about
mhm,
subject matter. And you could have a very open discussion with them and kind of be okay asking
mhm,
foolish questions, but also your pace of uptake had to be really fast. Like you had to be
mhm,
able to pick up complicated ideas. And then I think one of the big parts about venture is being able to synthesize and distill down complicated ideas in a very succinct way, which
mhm,
I think is one thing that like actually makes you a little bit better than everybody else, is
mhm,
the ability to do that. So I kind of already knew that I wanted to get into venture, but I ended up getting my first job out of college was in investment banking, and banking was long hours. It was pretty hard to
mhm,
actually do anything but the job itself. But I did get to work on a couple of IPOs. And so when we went on the road show for those companies, you started interacting with board members from venture firms. And I made an effort to interact with board members, but I also made an effort to really get to know the founders of these companies. Now, these were late stage companies. They were going public. Oftentimes they were like, hey, you're a junior investment banking analyst. Like, what do we have any reason to get to know you? But I remember making this joke early on, like I was the team Sherpa. So I
mhm,
basically used to carry the books, I'd carry the bags, I'd carry the CEO's like backpack. I was running around behind them. And I've always found a way to make myself useful. And I think that was like one of the very first ways that I did it. Got to know one of the founders super well. And then through them, they kind of said great things about me to other VCs that were on the road show, or there for the closing dinner or whatnot. And so that was an initial way that I got to know some VCs, but
mhm,
those were sort of more senior folks. And then I really wanted to get into venture, and it was hard to get into venture in 2013, 2014. There weren't a ton of VC junior level jobs. They were more senior level jobs, and so I cold emailed 100 Stanford alum off the Stanford alumni mailing list, and would do it between like 1 and 3 a.m. When I was in banking or when I had come home from work, and basically sent a bunch of emails to ask people if they were hiring, told them about a couple of companies I was excited about, told them about the work I'd done. And, people are always, somebody said this to me, is like, well, this is a very common saying, is like, you miss every shot you don't take. And I think
Mhm.
cold emailing is another example where I've never been hesitant to send a cold email. I think an
Mhm.
authentic cold email and an authentic story and like
Mhm.
a reason why you're reaching out is actually something that can capture people's attention. And
Mhm.
there's a good reason, and there could be a chance that somebody responds. What's the worst? They don't respond. I think I got something like 25 or 35
Mhm.
responses. Not a great hit rate. I mean, it was better than I expected, frankly.
It's great, I feel like. It's good.
Yeah,
When
and then
you're early on in your career, like in our spamming era, who
yeah.
cares?
Well, it's funny, back then, there weren't a ton of the venture ecosystem in that time was just so much smaller. There weren't as many funds,
Mhm.
there weren't as many people at as many funds. So it was just a smaller industry. And so I started sending a bunch of cold emails. And then, I eventually got a job at Crosslink, which was awesome. And when I
Mhm.
joined, the first thing I did was get to know every one of my peers across all of these firms. And so there were maybe like 30 or 40 associates or junior people in venture at the time, and I just made an effort to get to know everyone, because I was like, this is an industry I want to build my career in. This
Mhm.
is an industry where I believe there will be a lot of people that will stay,
Mhm.
and then some who won't stay. So, some of my best friends today, including one of my bridesmaids at my wedding, was a friend that I met first through venture, a lady named
Mhm.
Laura Cho, who's at Canaan Partners. And, I met her in 2014 at like a venture drinks or networking thing, and we got to know each other. And I think, early in venture careers, people always think going to all these events is really helpful. And yes, it's a great way to meet a lot of people. But I think then it's very critical to sort of like build your kind of one-on-one relationships and go a little bit deeper. And I've always found that these one-on-one relationships I've had with friends and people who've ended up being both part of my professional and personal life have been an
Mhm.
incredible, it's just been a deeper relationship than just
Mhm.
building these transactional business oriented ones. And then I would
Mhm.
say, I ended up building out relationships with people. Like, I'll give you an example. I got to know Jenny Leftcourt at Freestyle when she had just joined and I had just joined Crosslink. And we used to do like a monthly deal sharing call where we literally get on the phone once a month and we'd share every company that we were looking at and whether we were doing diligence and what stage we were in. And it was on one of these deal sharing calls that she told me that she was spending time with Alexi from BetterUp. And I remember asking if it was okay for me to reach out to him, and I reached out to him and I had a call with him. And then, soon after, within 2 or 3 months, we both ended up funding him and co-leading his, now pre-seed or early seed round at the time.
Mhm.
But it was a really exciting way to actually do this job and work in the industry. And I think getting to collaborate with other partners has always been a great way to deepen our relationship. And so, and and Jenny today runs Freestyle. She's one of the managing partners. She's also gone on to raise hundreds of millions of dollars and is still someone that I think really highly of, respect, and have, we've not traded as many deals recently, mostly for, I think we're looking at different industries, but whenever we have a company that we want to talk about, we always hop on a call. And it's someone who I'd love to, continue to share deals with. And it's someone who's been an advocate and, you use the word sponsor. And I'd say she's always been a supporter for a long time. Now, the word sponsor I think of a lot internally within organizations and within venture firms. And I think about this with, you know, when people get into the industry, I think it's really critical to always find a sponsor or somebody who's sort of a decision maker at the firm to be an advocate for
Mhm.
you. It's hard. It's not always the easiest thing to do, and sometimes it doesn't end up working out. But I think those people, it isn't going to be a handheld exercise. They are not going to walk
Mhm.
you through the best way to do the job, the best way to build relationships, but just being around somebody who's incredibly smart, who's well respected, or it's someone you really respect and you feel like you can build a strong relationship with, just finding ways to be in the room with them, asking them if you can shadow them and join them at board meetings, or asking them if you can join them on company pitches, finding ways to add value to their portfolio or finding ways to like assist them. I think getting that sponsor early on it's always really helpful to kind of build your long-term career at that firm. I would say Mark Zuster at Upfront has been that for me. And, he continues to be a very, very strong advocate for me, but also somebody who challenges me, also somebody that like I will take problems to, but also maybe be a problem for him at times. We get into healthy debate. And I think at the end of the day, I don't think it's a handheld exercise. When I joined in 2019, he didn't tell me how to do this job. If in fact, the only thing he said is like, take 1,000 meetings before you write your first check. And so just like getting even little nuggets like that is something that's super valuable. So I think finding an advocate and sponsor within your partnership early on just is so valuable in sort of building out your long-term career at the firm as well.
I wonder, so like when it comes to, you mentioned about like for BetterUp, it was like a shared deal by like another investor. And how do you think about like, I guess like working collaboratively with other investors, especially since I feel like Upfront has a great brand, and like I guess there's like two parts of the question. One is like how do you kind of like build a great brand in the industry, and then if you are not like if you're like an emerging manager or like emerging people in the industry, most people probably start with like one specific niche that they have and then maybe branch out from there. Maybe it's fintech or like it's something else. I guess like how do you kind of like either I guess like exchange the best deal with like other people instead of like, a lot of times I guess like a lot of times like people's concern would be like, let's say if you are a top name brand and then if you're sharing a deal with me, should I think it's like a deal that you already passed or like, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great question. And it's always such a balance because, so maybe I'll start by answering your question around how to build a brand. I wouldn't say I'm the expert at this, so take it with a grain of salt, or rather take it with sort of my perspective into consideration, which is, I think one way that I've done it is kind of finding areas of interest for me personally in terms of investment areas, right? So I would say earlier on in my career in venture, I sort of was, I'd say, kind of investing in anything. Like I had like a very broad mandate. I was sort of, very much incentivized to source a ton and wanted to source a lot. And so I'd be out meeting as many companies as I could, meeting as many founders. And I would say what made it actually harder is the context switching. So in this job, we're constantly context switching, right? One day we're talking, I start the morning, we're doing the podcast. Right after this, I have a board call. After that, I have 2 company pitches. After that, I'm doing an interview with a reporter. There's a ton of context switching all day long, right? However, I think what you can do to make it a little bit easier for yourself is try to focus in on a couple of areas where you can build context and you can be specific about kind of the types of companies you're looking at, the types of founders you're looking at. So I would say the way that I sort of built my brand, or I'm trying to build my brand, is narrowing that context a little bit, which is I'm only focused on early stage founders. It is you are raising your first institutional check, or, oh, by the way, you're not raising, you just want to get to know a friendly. And I think that is something that I care a ton about. It's some things I've talked about in the past is like just building relationships with people as if we are all humans and not trying to build these transactional relationships that have to be an outcome orientation. So that's one. The second is I did start off spending a lot of my time investing in fintech, and I still do invest in fintech and I still do look at it a lot. But, I've broadened my scope. I spend more time more broadly in B2B software. And how do you sort of prove that? I think you prove that by making more investments that are sort of beyond just that, I'd say, major or like swim lane that you're focused on. But I think having that anchor swim lane or having that anchor area that you are spending most of your time or have spent a lot of time in means that, one, you actually are an expert in something, which frankly, we always talk about this, is like you either know something or know someone better than anyone else does, right? And so I think when you pick a swim lane, you get to know a category much better than everyone else does, or much better than the majority of people do. You get to know every founder who's potentially raising. You get credibility with other VCs, with other founders that, hey, Aditi knows the space. She's made some investments. These are the types of deals she's done. These are the types of founders she's talking to. So I think the swim lane gives you credibility. I think the part that I'm kind of at the chasm of right
Mhm.
now is like sort of like, expanding that swim lane and kind of opening it up to a second aperture. And like most of my deals are B2B software companies. I spend a lot of time in vertical AI. I spend a lot of time in um, real estate tech and fintech and insure tech. So I've kind of broadened the scope, always focused on B2B, always focused on early stage founders. But I think actually investing in companies in those spaces and being able to talk about it, I think is incredibly important. And then having the founders do the work for you, right? When you invest in great founders who are building great businesses in these spaces, they want to talk about people that have invested in them, that have been, one of the first investors. I'd give you an example. I'm an investor in a company called Arcade, and Caroline Clark and I have been friends for a while now, and I feel incredibly lucky that I get to have invested in Caroline's company. But more than anything, I feel lucky that we get to actually work together for a very long time. It's not just like a 1 or 2 year relationship, but we really were like I get to be part of her journey of building this incredible business for the next 5 to 10 years, or maybe longer, maybe less. But the best part is I get Caroline as an advocate for me. She gets to talk about the things I've done, the ways I've added value to her business. So I think those are parts of elements of the brand building. Of course, VCs spend a lot of time doing things like this, which is, I think, an awesome opportunity to tell people more about what you're looking at. And also writing. I think, frankly, there are some people who are just incredible at like being consistent and writing regularly. I think Mark done a great job in the past. He had a blog. He has a blog called Both Sides of the Table, which I think people still reference. Obviously, Fred Wilson has an incredible blog, and so many others. Sarah Tavel, and then there are friends with like smaller funds that have also been consistent in their writing practice and have done a great job to sort of build out brands. And so I think that's like the ways by which people go about doing it. Now, I would say, speaking more specifically around how to, moving from just like building your brand, but also collaborating with other firms, I think it's always a balance, right? I have a friend in venture who once told me she's never lost a deal to another friend because she shared a deal with them. Ultimately, founders do pick the VCs that they want to work with, and it has to be a mutual fit, right? We talk a lot about this, which is called, we look for upfront founder fit, which is we really want to work with founders who want to work with us. But also we want to work with founders who understand sort of what is our product, what is the value of having one of us involved in the opportunity, or rather having the whole team involved, and like what is the long-term impact for them or value for them. And so I do have a similar mindset. Like I do think, obviously the industry is a lot more competitive today. There's a lot more firms. Everyone's chasing similar deals, and there's a lot smaller pieces of the pie available to actually invest in these businesses. But I do think that I err on the side of more of being collaborative than competitive, because frankly, I think founders know who they're looking for. And if they don't, then oftentimes you as an investor can help guide them to figure out what they should be looking for, or they can spend time with their founder friends, with angel friends, to better understand how do they make the decision about who the right person for their firm or for their business should be, and who the right partner should be. I always encourage founders to kind of reflect into the fact that this shouldn't be a shotgun wedding, and it really is a 5 to 10 year relationship you're building with VCs. So know who you are signing up to get married to. So yeah, that's kind of how I think a little bit more about the collaborative side of this business, which frankly, I'd say it's gotten less collaborative over time, but it's something that I still err on or try to do more of.
I wonder, so like I know that like Upfront have the Upfront Summit, and like you guys you guys are primarily based in LA and you are in the Bay Area. I wonder what is like, how does it look like to build an ecosystem in LA in terms of like through events or through other brand building activities to invest in this ecosystem's top deal? What's like the different like kind of like landscape look like when it comes to the LA tech ecosystem versus like SF?
Yeah. Uh, It's funny because I obviously am based up in San Francisco, and so I'm spending less time building it, but I'm fortunate to have joined a firm which
Mhm.
obviously is very established in LA, but also has done a great job establishing their relationships, establishing our foothold. I'd start off by saying when Upfront was established and when Upfront first began, it actually used to be called Global Retail Partners. And then it sort of evolved into Upfront about 15 years ago, or the name evolved, and we started doing the Upfront Summit and things like that. But when Upfront started investing in the LA ecosystem, there weren't a ton of venture firms investing in LA, and I think that planting the flag that there are some incredible industries that are native to Los Angeles: the
Mhm.
media industry, the entertainment industry, gaming, healthcare. Now, obviously, over the last like 5-7 years, we've been seeing aerospace and defense. And I
Mhm.
think what we've done a great job of as a firm is kind of establishing, I'd say, these swim lanes that we kind of spend our time focused on as partners. And we typically have like majors and minors, or primary majors, secondary majors, whatever we want to call
Mhm.
them. But we cover those categories extensively. And I think just going really deep into those categories allows you to get to know every founder building in that space, every founder who potentially will build in that space, and kind of deepening the network and ecosystem. I wouldn't say it's too atypical from what I described of brand building around around like a category itself. The geography aspect is similar. You want to pick the categories that are native to that geography. So we really do have coverage around that. My partner Kevin spends a lot of his time in gaming and healthcare, and he's really mapped out those ecosystems. And I would say if there's a company that's raising in either of those spaces, and they're in LA, like it's a no-brainer. They talk to Kevin. And then my partner Nick spends a lot of time in aerospace and defense, as well as my partner Mark. And so I think folks have started to really I think being able to focus on a couple of areas that are really native to the ecosystem is critical. I think the Upfront Summit is an amazing product that we have. I think of it as a product. I think, venture firms have a
Mhm.
lot of different products. It's like one of our great products, I'd say. It started off primarily as like a reason to bring people together, not just and have, smaller conversations, more intimate setting, get to know one another within the venture ecosystem. There weren't a lot of reasons to get together in this
Mhm.
sort of like scale. And now over time, it's gotten a lot bigger. We bring in a lot of LPs, we bring in a lot of VCs. There's a lot of entrepreneurs. I'd say there's a lot of more entrepreneurs. And then
Mhm.
it's an opportunity to also interact with the LA community from, folks in media and entertainment, from sports, from, people in politics, people from the journalist world, things across the board. We kind of like really do span a whole variety of different types of people to bring in. And one of the biggest things that I think we always think about is the different audience members who we think are going to be there, or the different types of people who are going to attend, and how do we make sure it's a great event for everyone who's joining. I think VC firms obviously continue to build brands and continue to have a reason that they're sort of stand out or known for. And frankly, I think the firms that are going to last and stand the test of time really do have products, or really do have something that, everyone talks about edge. It's like some kind of edge, some kind of differentiation in the market from everything else. And so I'd say we've kind of picked our lanes. We've picked areas we're really deeply invested in and we're excited about. And then I think also products like the Upfront Summit, amongst other things that we do, are great. One thing we also really we pushed a big effort around was not just doing a big event like Upfront Summit, but also hosting smaller events that we used to do um, pre-pandemic, and actually we've just started again, is doing these monthly breakfasts on our roof deck. We have a beautiful roof deck in LA. Our offices are in Santa Monica, like overlooking the ocean, and just kind of has a beautiful view. And just having people come together on the way to work, just like drop by, have breakfast on the patio or on the roof, and kind of getting to know other people in the ecosystem. It's a reason to bring people together. It's sort of on their way to work, or it's kind of on their, or maybe it's not on their way if they're work from home, but they do make a detour out. Everyone has to eat breakfast.
Mhm.
But it's a really good way to have like smaller reason to bring community together. I'd say founders in general don't always want there to be a transactional reason that they're meeting someone. It doesn't always have to be a fundraising meeting. It doesn't always have to be, I need something out of you. It could also just be, I want to meet more people like myself, or people who are going through similar things. And if Upfront's pulling it together on their roof and they have a great breakfast, why not? So I think we've done a really good job of things like that.
I wonder how do you kind of like curate who would be like a good attendee, and then like how do you kind of like track these events like ROI from like an investor perspective?
Yeah. I mean, so we do a really good job of kind of having like a people CRM, and in terms of just managing kind of folks that we know in the ecosystem, people who've attended breakfast in the past or events in the past that we've hosted, but also people who we want to include in the next few events who
Mhm.
or people who've said no and they would like to be included. So I think that's like very robust, and we have a really great talent team and a marketing and platform team that kind of help to manage this. But I'd say the other thing that's I think really critical is um, curating actually is a job that is requires thoughtfulness. Like I think people sometimes tend to say, "Hey, let's just have a bunch of people together and it's going to be fine." I think actually curating and thinking through like who's going to be there, what's
Mhm.
the connectivity that everybody has, and how do you make sure that everybody feels they're going to get something out of it is very important. And so we spend a
Mhm.
lot of time thinking through invites, thinking through who else is going to be there, thinking through like if this one person is coming, are they going to have like three people to talk to? Or are they going to have no people to talk to? Just making sure that
Mhm.
everyone feels it was valuable time spent for them.
Mhm.
And then I think on an ROI perspective, we view it as like these are long-term relationships we're building. I don't think it's like, oh, we got a deal out of a breakfast that we hosted, or we got this company funded out of the Upfront Summit. It would be great if all those things happen. Those things do tend to happen on their own organically. But I think for us, I always say like one of the biggest things I care about is just long-term relationship building. This life is long. People you meet today, maybe people you get to work with, or it could be someone you end up working with 10 years from now, or it's someone you never end up working with, but just ends up being a great friend. And so I think that's how I always equate or put the value on ROI. And I'd say, the thing about all of this is it's very important, I think, for firms to kind of establish or figure out what is it that they are trying to build a story around. Like who are they trying to be? What is the brand you're trying to build? I think if you don't have a sense of that, you can end up doing a lot of things, throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping that something works. But really having intention with what you're trying to achieve is pretty important.
I want to like dive into a separate topic, which
Yeah,
is AI. We're not in 2024 if we don't talk about AI. But
I'm sure.
so on the application side of things, like what are something that excites you in the AI space?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think there's a bunch of different categories. I'd say there's the multimodal aspect of things, which
Mhm.
I do think a lot of folks are thinking more about beyond just text is and image generation, but also how do you think about more about voice? How are you thinking more
Mhm.
about the integration of all three? So I think voice continues to be something that we're actually really excited about, and we're spending a lot of time looking at, and we've made a couple of investments in the
Mhm.
space already, but we continue to be excited about different voice applications, whether it is to the healthcare industry, whether it is to the fintech industry. As like even a simple example, this is just like this is kind of a multimodal experience for the application layer, but as I think a lot about as an individual, if you were applying for a mortgage, you would typically engage with, a mortgage or loan officer. You'd kind of, or you'd go to your bank, they'd assign you a
Mhm.
banker, you'd engage with your mortgage broker, or rather your loan officer. You'd have to go through this whole process. And there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of reasons that, people can be, there's KYC, there's also ways by which you will basically you could be red flagged, you could be
Mhm.
yellow flagged. There's all these complicated processes that do require, and some of them frankly can be pretty straightforward, but there's 100
Mhm.
humans in the loop, there's a billion people who need loans, and this process is pretty much slowed down. Mortgages is one example, but you can also think about car loans, you can think about personal loans, you can think about applying for credit cards. And I think a lot of it comes down, I think a lot about how if you were to able to create this like integrative experience between like voice as well as sort of somebody who's actually doing an agent that's doing the interaction itself, there's something really interesting here to build out where a lot of the manual tasks, or as I like to describe, like the B minus work and below,
Mhm.
should be automated and can be basically taken off the plates of, many different folks doing this. I think allowing labor to primarily focus on the A plus work,
Mhm.
which is the final decision. Like, hey, all these things are checked, or all these things were red flagged. This person should be rejected. This person should be accepted. And then also just having an interaction with a voice agent, kind of saying like, hey, we know you've applied for this. Like, these are some follow-up questions we had. This is how we go about doing it. And that's like an interesting use case where I think a lot about the different ways by which voice as well as like an interaction with an agent can help. I think the applications in tech are super interesting. I think the applications in more broadly around workflow, like thinking about how to enable, marketers to better tell stories, how to enable product managers to make faster decisions and basically automate a bunch of their work. As when I spent time in product when I was at Google, one thing I spent a lot of time, you write out PRDs and you spend so much time sort of iterating and waiting for collaborative feedback from your engineering counterpart, from your designers. But what if there were ways by which like some of that could already be automated and kind of pre-populated? There's a bunch of companies doing this, but I do think a lot of the I think a lot about like the user inside an organization
Mhm.
and how do you automate workflow for the business team, or more generally the ops team, the product team, the eng team, and the design team. Those are people that I think a lot about, and those are ICPs I'm spending time finding businesses that are enabling them, as well as marketing. And then I'd say more broadly, I spent a lot of time looking at fintech applications. I think that there's interesting use cases of voice agents there. There's interesting use cases for faster lending decisions, whether it's for the individual, whether it's for the SMB. There's also, I'm an investor in a company called ZestAI, which is one of our portfolio companies for a long time. And, they spend so much time removing biases around lending decisions that credit unions would make. And when you and I applying for a loan, things might look a little bit different than somebody who has of a different skin color, of a different gender. And I think what Zest is trying to do is completely remove the bias around these lending decisions and sort of like make sure they have a whole suite of their own models that basically are helping credit unions make more unbiased decisions. And it's a business that, continues to do really good work. And so I think some of those use cases are super interesting. Frankly, beyond that, I think I've talked about this a little bit in the past. There's really interesting use cases even around climate and insurtech, and I think there's more to come there. It's an area that I'm starting to spend some time in and starting to get a little bit deeper on. So I would say I'm still in the early innings of kind
Mhm.
of going into that space, but that's another area that I'm getting pretty interested and excited about.
I wonder, I want to maybe like double click on like you mentioned like the B minus workflow. Like,
Yeah.
so I guess like how do you define like what is like a B minus workflow? Is that just like assuming it's like more of like the manual work, but like I feel like there is a lot of like GPT wrappers. And how do you kind of like differentiate which one actually like which company actually have the differentiation among like their 500 other competitors in the space?
Yeah, I think that's really hard. Frankly, I think that the question that I always come back to is who's paying for it, how much are they paying for it, and are they sticking around,
Mhm.
right? I think that this is a question that's coming up quite a bit within the AI, or rather
Mhm.
when evaluating AI businesses in general, specifically at the application layer, is big companies, I'd say big companies and medium-sized companies have quite a bit of discretionary AI spend. And so they have budget to basically spend and experiment with a bunch of different products, try a whole bunch of different things. But the question is, are they able to actually, are people actually spending beyond just the first few months, or trying their trial period, or are they actually sticking to the product and using it for a longer period of time? So I think that is something I come back to a lot, and I'm looking quite a bit. And obviously, the seed stage, we don't have years and years of data, but you obviously have even like a couple months, even people converting from pilots to full contracts. Like we are starting to see that in earnest. So I
Mhm.
think we're starting to question which companies are truly showing value versus which companies are just nice to haves.
Mhm.
So that's one. I think on your question around how do you know, or rather, and I think that's more to answer sort of your second question on like how do you understand differentiation between all these rappers. I would say the other answer that I have, or going in a little bit deeper, one thing that I think a lot about is the B minus work. It is rote work. It's work
Mhm.
that's kind of being done over and over again. It's not that it's necessarily work that you know isn't high productivity, but I would say it's not necessarily the best use of an employee's time, and it can kind of be automated or it's manual work itself. I'd say that in particular is something that I'd say requires less level of like a lower level of reasoning
Mhm.
and more just tactical repetition, or even just tactical work itself. So I think higher level reasoning work is work that all that employees should be primary, or people part of the workforce should be focused on. And I'd say lower level reasoning work is probably some of the work that I'm talking about that can be automated, and maybe people will use multiple GPT-4 wrappers to do that. I don't think it's that everyone has one solution today.
Mhm.
As an example, I'll say this is a very small personal use case example, but I use voice to, or a text to voice a lot, where
Mhm.
I basically will drop in like any long form content that I need to read while I'm on a long drive, and
Mhm.
I'll listen to it. It could even be like a 30-minute drive or a
Mhm.
25-minute drive, and I want to listen to some long form content. I'll
Mhm.
drop it in one of these apps that basically does the translation or the transcription from text to voice. I've used OpenAI for it, or ChatGPT for it. I've used a product called Natural Reader. I've used so many different products that do this. And frankly, I don't know if there's going to be one product that I pay for. For me, that use case is I want it fast, and I want it free. It's a solution that does it, right?
Mhm.
But if it was something more integral, like, hey, it's also deriving insights for me, or it's kind of like giving me a quick summary before I even get to it. Okay, again, there could be many products to do that, but I want to get to a higher level of reasoning with that product, and I want to see the real value that it's bringing for me. So yeah, I don't know if I'm ever going to pay for a product to do that for me, but that's an example personal use case that I think a lot about is like voice to text, or text to voice, and how to make it more valuable for me.
I wonder, since like you guys invest in companies in a very towards like the very early stage, what would be on your personal checklist to like maybe like judge every company based off like the same agenda? Because sometimes like when I was working in venture, I feel like one of the hardest thing is like I only remember the last company I chat with, like although they may not be the best, but I feel like it's really hard to even like you create like a short memo for each one. It's like really hard to judge. It's just always like a vibe. How do you kind of like actually formulate some sort of judgment characteristics to that? And I think you talk about a little bit on like about like the leveraging like technology to source deal like when it comes to sourcing like on Peter's podcast about like other people may think like venture could be replaced by technology. You don't think so? I wonder what are certain things that you feel like are like hard criteria for a company to be succeed more than others versus like what are just like generally like soft skills based off like your kind of like past experience.
Yeah, so uh, lots of questions in there. So maybe I'll start off by
Yeah.
addressing the first couple you mentioned. So I actually do try to write a note to myself after
Mhm.
every company meeting. It's just a quick analysis, whether it's like 3 to 5 sentences
Mhm.
or maybe a couple of paragraphs of just what I liked about the company, what I didn't like about the company, and the questions that I'm left
Mhm.
outstanding. It's actually an exercise I started doing a couple years ago, only because, exactly to your point, it's hard to
Mhm.
remember which companies you've met. It's hard to remember what you liked and what you didn't like. And I also think what's pretty challenging is I think writing is actually a really good practice to just to get your ideas down, but also to be able to crystallize exactly how you were thinking about it. And what I've been doing over time is I'll go back and kind of pull out the nuggets of things. When I look at like what I liked about the company, there's often themes across all the companies that I do like. And it always starts with team. For me, every decision is a founder first decision around a company. And I think I'm always looking for founders that have like an incredibly high tolerance, I would say, and high resilience factor. Tolerance maybe for hardship, but also tolerance for the ups and downs. Company building is obviously not always up and to the right. It's a roller coaster. And I think being able to tolerate the good and also the bad, and also just being able to be resilient through it, I think is critical. Obviously, you've heard this before. There were a lot of entrepreneurs during the last couple of years. And I think people have ended up leaving the industry primarily because it has been hard to be a founder in these times if you're not building, a really sexy AI company that is solving every possible problem under the sun. So I think number one is really always being team focused for me has just been part of my decision-making criteria. We actually have gone so far. Our talent partner, Megan Healy, and I, who I always consider basically one of our secret weapons when I am running a process with a company. She's somebody who I actually have spent quite a bit of time like building out a people rubric of like what it is in terms of teams that I'm looking for. Things like resilience, things like an obsession with work product, with work quality, really strong leadership, like a higher level of intellect, a sense of urgency, and just being more hands-on. I think a lot of founders think that they can kind of like sit back in their computers and kind of get things done, but founders are getting on planes, getting to customers. One of my founders, Nico, the founder of Clair, is on a plane probably every other week or maybe even every week to go meet his customers, to get in front of them. He fundamentally believes that like getting a contract through or getting an implementation through doesn't just require you to do it via Zoom. He himself still to this day will get on a plane and get out there to go meet his customers, troubleshoot things, help them build a model, help them talk through a PRD. And I think those things really make a difference. So I have a more fleshed out people rubric that I really spend a lot of time, that I've spent a lot of time working with Megan on and really evolving. But I'd say, frankly, we use that a lot with decision making. And then the actual memorializing or like sort of writing the memo itself is actually very helpful in terms of translating what a founder's experience or what my experience of understanding that company and that founder did. It also helps me better describe what businesses do. Oftentimes, I think it's hard to describe what companies do when you just hear them in a 30 or 40-minute pitch. And so then actually being able to write it down, I think is critical. And then I would say, as I think more bigger picture about the companies that have done really well and founders or businesses that have sort of like, kind of escaped the velocity of sort of the seed and Series A and then gone on to raise larger rounds of funding. Some things that I always say is that it's founders who have a maniacal focus on the thing that they need to do for that period of time. From the seed to the A, it's oftentimes proving out that there are customers who are willing to use your product and willing to try it out and then willing to pay for it. From the A to the B, I think it is being able to show and prove to founders that, or being able to show and prove that people actually want your product for the longer term. So there's the stickiness factor, there's the lower churn, and then there's actually like, we're expanding, we're growing, we're not just growing across new customers, but we're also deepening within the existing customer. We started with the marketer as an ICP, but now we're selling to product managers and to salespeople. So like going a lot deeper. And then Series B onwards, it's sort of like scaling a lot of things at the same time, scaling your team, scaling your leadership, scaling your, how do you go deeper within these customer implementations? How do you make it faster? And I think founders who have the maniacal focus to know exactly what they need to get done between this stage to the next stage. Also, by the way, being able to lay out the stages for themselves, independent to fundraising milestones, but also just like anchoring them on revenue targets, anchoring them on like the business targets themselves. I think the founders who have the most focus are the ones who are able to go through there. It's very hard to find a unique idea in venture or in technology, right? There's a million ideas that kind of look the same. And really, I think it always comes down to founder execution and their ability to do things with such focus and frankly humility, and being able to take a team along with them
Mhm.
is like so critical, because founders today spend so much time, they're like a body blocker. They're blocking, they're shielding their team from dealing with bad customers. They're shielding their team from dealing with like tough investors. They're shielding their teams. And I find that founders are oftentimes like so protective of their teams because they want their teams to stay focused. And the CEO or the founder themselves has to kind of like, manage everything else. But I think a CEO or founder who can also find ways to get their leadership team involved in that problem solving and like be as focused as they are on the
Mhm.
stage of the business is actually really hard to do. And I think companies that are doing that are able to kind of go escape the velocity of just getting stuck at the like earliest stages of businesses and actually like becoming really great large companies that are, building successful products for their customers. So I think that's something that I always come back to is this founder mindset.
I wonder, so let's say if there is a founder that's like, so there's like two type of founders. Like let's say if there's like a founder that were like a head of product, head of BD, head of go to market, head of like something, or like the first group of core employees at a unicorn company, and then they went out and they start a new company. Maybe it's like in a different space but selling to a similar set of customers versus like a person who just graduated, great at like the implementation on the technology, but never had like a track record. Um, which side of like founders that are you thinking have like a better chance to succeed to approach like a particular problem and call it like applications out of AI, let's say AI assistants or
Yeah, it's funny that you bring it up because I actually am in the process of this right now, and I
Mhm,
think I always talk about founders having lived experiences where,
mhm,
you've actually worked with these customers before,
mhm,
or you've built for these customers
mhm,
before, or you worked at the customer and you were
mhm,
the customer, and now you
mhm,
want to build the product that can solve their pain point.
mhm,
So I think those founders are great, and frankly, those founders have a perspective, and I think
mhm,
they can typically get into an industry and start building very quickly. They know how to build, they know why they're building, and they actually know, they potentially have a sense of like who they're going to hire, right?
mhm,
One downside is those founders also have their own biases. They also kind of have their own hypotheses of what they lived, and they're like, we're certain that this is exactly how it's going to be done. And unless they're, humble and nimble, will they
mhm,
kind of be okay to adjust based on customer needs?
mhm,
Sometimes it's harder for them to hear the voice of the customer because they're spending so much time certain that they know their hypothesis of what they have to solve for.
mhm,
I'd say these, younger, earlier founders who have not had as much experience with building in that category, or have not spent as much time understanding, you know, the space as somebody who has the lived experience. But what they spend a lot of time doing is learning from customers. I actually think there's something incredibly, now these founders can be more naive. They're sort of like, I'd say walking in the dark a little bit. Then they're kind of like, feeling around to kind of figure out the problems. And
mhm,
eventually you hope that they figure it out. They've kind of like mapped out and figured out how to get around and how to move things, and, who the different players are and who they're serving. But I think the one thing they do an incredible job of is listen to their customers. They really go very deep listening to customers, and better understanding the root of their problems and what they need to solve for. And I think that is something that's very unique to, again, it's a little bit of the mindset is like, are they humble? Are they nimble? Are they open to the feedback? Are they open to the perspective? And or are they stubborn and frankly have a strong hypothesis and not willing to listen? So I worry less about like, do you have lived experience and are you brand new? Like that comparison to me is it's a worthy comparison, and I think lived experience is always very valuable. But I oftentimes I spend a lot of time thinking about, do you understand the customer need and are you addressing what a customer needs, versus do you think you know what you have to build and then you're building it in isolation and you're not actually listening to the customer. So I think that's one of the things that I include in my framework when evaluating founders and teams themselves.
What would be like, I want to maybe dive into like a large segment, which is like, a lot of founders are listening to the podcast, and then maybe they don't really have the big logo, or like they don't really have um any experience in the past. Maybe they have been living in like a city that like doesn't have the tech ecosystem. They want to reach out to an investor like yourself. What would be the most effective ways? Because in the past everyone was saying like you need a warm intro from like another VC, but the problem is like, how do I get to another VC when I
Sure.
don't know VC, right? So what would be your suggestion for this group of people?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. So I think looking at the people that you're reaching out to,
Mhm,
understanding their background, but really understanding the areas they're investing in.
mhm,
Sometimes people are public about what they're investing in,
mhm,
and sometimes people are not that public about what they're investing in. They're a little bit, you can see what they're interacting with on Twitter. You can see what they're interacting with on
mhm,
LinkedIn. Those are kind of channels where you can see how
mhm,
they're engaging within the tech community. And I think finding oftentimes people think that they need to reach out to everyone. I'd
mhm,
say very simply, like, one, starting off with a very clear list of who you want to reach out to, right? Who is the
mhm,
right type of investor you want to talk to, stage, their check size, their investment areas. Typically it's on the website, or you can use Crunchbase, or you could even see it on like
mhm.
Signal. There's a bunch
Yeah.
available products. So I think one, figuring that out is pretty critical. Two, write an email that's pretty clear, but do not make it super lengthy. Like, I think actually writing a succinct email is very hard because you
Mhm.
need to have a good subject that is like somewhat gives them a reason to open up the email itself.
What's your favorite subject line though?
My favorite subject line is something that references what the company, or like, it's something like Clair, this for that, similar to this company that you've invested in. Would love to talk to you about it. It can be something as simple as that. I mean, that's probably a little bit more wordy than it
Mhm,
needs to be, but I think even keeping it, that's actually a really hard part, is like keeping it pretty short. Like, you don't have to write me, paragraphs and paragraphs about your life history and my life history. That's what a phone call is for. That's what a Zoom is for. But I think like being able to keep your, like, what is your business, why you want to connect based on my background that you think is relevant to your business, and then how do you reach out. It's very simple. Some tactical mistakes people make, like
mhm.
people use mail senders all the time, and they literally, it says like dear blank, and I
Yeah.
know that you've like sort of mass emailed a bunch of people, or people misspell my name. Even that, as like a simple example, I'm like, I'm probably not going to open that. I mean, I'll read your email, but I'm also wondering if you're taking this very seriously or not. I think whenever I send a cold email, I know that the person I'm writing to is very busy. They have a million things going on. They have no reason to open my email. So I want my headline to be catchy and something that they want to open it for. And the second thing is my ask of them. I want it to be lightweight for them. You have to think that ultimately you're asking someone to take time out of their day to spend with you. So you want to make the ask out of them lightweight. Like, here's my Calendly link. Please click on it. I'd love to be able to hop on a Zoom and chat with you, over 20-25 minutes and tell you about my business. That's it. It can be very simple at the end, but I think making it as easy for the person that you're asking or that you're reaching out to is actually very critical.
Would you say, let's say like asking advice or asking for money. So like a lot of people are saying if you want money, you ask for advice versus vice versa. Um, what's your thought on that? And then we can maybe wrap up soon because I want to make sure you get
Yeah.
into the next meeting.
Yeah, no worries. I would say, look, you're obviously reaching out to someone because you're fundraising. You can
Mhm,
just say like, we're about to kick off fundraising. We're excited to connect with you for X, Y, and Z reason. This is a little bit about my business. And if you are interested, would love to spend time with you. Here's my Calendly link. It can be as simple as that. I think saying that you are fundraising is valuable because people then know there's intention. Otherwise, if you're like, I would love to get to know you, it's harder to get somebody to actually engage with that.
For sure. Okay, so I want to jump into a quick 30-second fire round.
Sure.
What's your favorite book?
I love a book called Shiva Dancing. It's by an Indian author called Bharti Kitchener. It's about life changing every 7 years.
Oh wow. That's deep. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Probably Indira Gandhi, one of the
Uh,
prime ministers of India.
who made the biggest impact in your career?
My dad.
Where can we find you outside of work?
At Alta Plaza Park playing with my daughter in the playground.
Oh wow, that's so specific. Love that. Quick shout out to Akshay and Yusuf. Thank you guys for joining our show. Thank you so much, Aditi. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Grace. This was great. And keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job. So appreciate you having me on.
Amazing. And where can people find you? You want to give
Um,
your social a quick shout out?
yeah, LinkedIn and Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Gimme the Deets, and my LinkedIn profile, as you can all see. I know I've had a Twitter handle since I was a junior in college. It could probably use an update, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, love it. Okay, so thank you again. Let me just quickly